Hi, I'm Mandy Leverett from CAN, Church and Community Abolition Network, where we equip everybody to respond to local human trafficking. Together, we're building an army of everyday abolitionists with best practice recovery resources in reach of every victim. So we've done so much together. I wanted to highlight, and I thank you at the New Jersey Human Trafficking Taskforce. Thank you, Kathy Fries, for these really important issues, these topics that we're talking about today. And because some of the people on our panel weren't able to make it to the panel in person, we wanted to make sure that this information was shared with you. So thank you so much for this opportunity. I've served our state for quite a while. I'm a charter member of our faith-based subcommittee of the task force, and I've served in general, and as well as our state coalition. And we've really worked to do so many important things in the state. And I wanted to highlight some of my friends here: Reverend Marsha Mansour, Reverend Nancy Tonelson, and Deborah Fleetwood, as well as the CAN Abolition Advocate for their church at Evangel Church, Susana Quayle. They serve in many different capacities, but I wanted to highlight and give them an opportunity to kind of share where they have intersected this issue with the people they serve. So first of all, Reverend Pastor Marsha, or Reverend Mansour, she is for a long time served as a pastor, but right now she is an international revivalist doing incredible work. But back when you were a children's pastor at the same church that we're talking about, you intersected human trafficking right there. So can you tell us how that all transpired?
Sure. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share, Pastor Mandy. And I so applaud your work in this area. It's such a vital part of what the church should be doing. And so you actually came and spoke. You and I had met, and I heard your heart, and I was like, I want to bring this resource to our church. And so we hosted an event, and you had made a statement to me prior to that you had never really ever done an event in a church where you did not bump into one or two families or even more that did not experience trafficking on some level. And I kind of put that in the back of my head, and I really didn't think much of it. And then that night, two families came to you from our church that was experiencing trafficking. And that was really eye-opening to me, that right in our community, this was going on. And one of them, their daughter was disabled. She had a disability, and it really was a huge struggle to get her help because she thought the trafficker was her friend. They had manipulated her. They had, they groomed her. They played a long game with her, and they won her friendship and won her trust and won her care. She actually cared about the trafficker. She didn't want to hurt him. She didn't want to hurt, she didn't want him to get into trouble. And so this family was desperate to rescue their daughter. And I'm grateful to you. You walked with us during that time. And it took us, I want to say, maybe 2 years to actually get her help and everything that she needed, because she was an obstacle to her own freedom, because she actually kept defending this person that ultimately was hurting her. And she didn't realize it because he was so good at his deception and so good at grooming her and speaking into her vulnerability. He took advantage of her vulnerability. He was sinister. And from what, you and I have talked, this is not a new game. This is the game that's being played. And it was very eye-opening to try and convince her for her own freedom.
One of the things that was in this situation, but I've noticed is a pattern, especially when developmentally disabled adults are being groomed. A lot of times the trafficker will actually coach them how to get a restraining order against their real support system, their family or something like that, so that the family, when they find out something is not normal, something is wrong in this relationship, they go to law enforcement, and what happens? Well, there's a restraining order. So in this case, I know the family had to get a well care visit because they didn't have access to their loved one because of this very manipulative practice that we're finding is quite a pattern in when it comes to developmentally disabled. And a lot of times it's because of the nature, they're very trusting individuals, that they're not cynical, right? So it's very easy to coach them to do things that they
have no guile in them.
Yeah.
They have no guile, so they play on that.
And so that's one of the things we've helped give to a lot of organizations that specifically serve developmentally disabled and their families so they can work preventatively. So it's amazing. I mean, a lot of people think, well, that's, healthcare, you might run into that or some other sector, but it comes into the faith community as well. So regardless of what in the audience, those that are of many different faiths or no faith, we really see this, we intersect human trafficking for these two topics that we're focusing on today with the task force. We see this quite a bit. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that for those that are in the audience. And then I wanted to talk about an area that is not considered a disability, but some organizations do consider it a disability. So we wanted to bring in the deaf and hard of hearing community. And first of all, I wanted to, Pastor Nancy, she pastors the multicultural church. She pastors specifically the deaf culture. And so she brought along one of her congregants, Deborah, and they wanted to kind of explain, and I want to ask them to explain to the hearing community why deaf culture is not a disability.
A disability, they're labeled as disabled because they can't hear, but it's not the same because they're not the same as the hearing. So disabled mean that they need special help. They need interpreters and special need for a special needs is considered disabled. And so they don't consider themselves as disabled because I can do things as a deaf person. And they're not dependent. So in clarity is that deaf culture itself is its own, because people are deaf and they connect with each other. Signing connects the community, and they're a very close-knit group that most of the people can, they can work, they can drive, they can do all the things that a hearing person can do except for hear. So, so in the culture, Deborah has been very successful in the deaf community, leading different events, fundraisers, different things. But, like, there's still a vulnerability to the deaf because they can't hear, and because people might think of that they're easy access and vulnerability.
So in the deaf culture, I know that you, Pastor Nancy and Susana, you guys helped to lead the first sign language event specifically for this community. It served New Jersey and the tri-state area. And I want to just thank you and applaud you for doing that. But I also wanted to talk about some of the things that you learned in this process, what might be the vulnerabilities you've experienced. Also, I know we've talked about how, so one of sent from New Jersey, a former New Jersey student, she's in Colombia, working among the deaf culture there. And one of the things that she wanted to be trained at human trafficking, because she knew that culture had a little more isolation in the deaf community. So I want to talk to you about, okay, what are some of the unique areas, or is there increased or unique areas where there are vulnerabilities to human trafficking for the deaf culture?
So go ahead, Susana.
No, go ahead.
No, the thing is that the vulnerabilities are, similar to any vulnerability, like, because they're many times believe, look, if somebody wants to connect with them and open up a friendship, and the grooming and all of those kind of things would be the same in the deaf community as well. And so people look at the deafness as something that they can take advantage of.
I think also there might be areas where they don't always have access to the same information. Maybe there's an awareness event in their community, but it's not signed, or it's not in closed caption. So sometimes they don't always have access to the same information to prevent it or to be aware of the signs. I know I've seen that a bit. Susanna, one of the things that you ran into was when you were helping decide what language to use. Just like any language, translating the word human trafficking can have its challenges, because even in English, the idea the idea that there's movement involved, often that's not the case. So sometimes the words we choose can lead to misinformation. So you ran into several different signs in sign language that were used, and some that were better than others. Can you explain that?
Yeah, sure. When I looked online, first of all, I do agree with you. The information is very lacking for the deaf. When I looked online, there was very, very few online videos for the deaf about human trafficking. There was some maybe with closed captioning, but in terms of sign language itself, maybe I found one, and it was really, really short. And then in terms of the actual signs for human trafficking, I saw a couple of them. If you look online, you can see most of the time it's human, which is this, and then like stealing, which I particularly don't like, because most times people aren't stolen. They're fooled, they're groomed, whatever, but most of the time they're not stolen. One deaf woman, she showed me her sign, and it was human trafficking. This is trafficking like cars, trafficking, but it's hidden. So it's human trafficking. Another deaf woman, she showed me human trafficking. Again, it kind of looks like you're stealing the person, you're grabbing them off the street. And again, most times that's not what happens. So I really like the human trafficking, okay?
I love that, because the solution came from the deaf community, came from
Yes.
the culture. And I think anytime we reach a culture, we need to understand it, but also we need to have input from that culture. And so I just want to especially thank all of my guests here, but also Kathy Freeze, the New Jersey Human Trafficking Taskforce, for including the broad community and highlighting specific topics like these that we're learning about today. If any of you have want to learn more about these organizations, our information is below, and also we have an information table in the back. Thank you for including us in this broader conversation.